My girlfriend and I were avid campers, often heading into the Appalachian Mountains for weekend getaways. Living in Virginia, we had easy access to countless trails, and spending time outdoors was our escape from stressful work weeks. One Saturday, we chose a 3-mile trail leading to a secluded campsite on a flatter section of the mountain. We'd never been to this particular spot, but its positive reviews reassured us. The drive was short, just 45 minutes, but as we got closer, rain started pouring. Mountain weather could be unpredictable, but we were used to it and didn't let it deter us. When we reached the trailhead, there was only one other car parked nearby. Oddly, the passenger door was slightly open. No one was around, so I walked over and pushed it shut, figuring the owner had left it open by mistake. With that, we grabbed our gear and began the hike. The trek took about 2 hours since most of it was uphill. When we arrived at the campsite, we immediately noticed a small tent already pitched in the middle of the clearing. It was tiny, definitely meant for just one person. We assumed whoever was inside was staying dry from the rain, so we moved to a far corner and set up our own tent. After an hour of resting and drying off, we heard voices outside. The sound of rain against the tent made it impossible to hear clearly, so I unzipped the flap and peeked out. I was startled as 2 men were crouched just a few feet away, staring at us. They quickly smiled and introduced themselves, claiming they had been camping there for a few days. Something about them felt off. Their clothes, tight jeans and basic t-shirts, didn't seem suited for the rugged conditions. And their tent? There was no way it could fit 2 grown men comfortably. They left after a brief chat, and I zipped the tent shut. My girlfriend and I exchanged uneasy glances. We decided to keep a small gap in the zipper so we could watch them, just in case. An hour passed, then another. We saw no movement from their tent. It was unsettling, but eventually, night fell, and we decided to sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. Slipping on a cheap rain poncho, I stepped out behind the tent. That's when I heard voices. I turned in every direction, trying to pinpoint where they were coming from. The rain distorted the sound, but my gut told me something wasn't right. Then, I noticed something chilling. The small tent in the center of the site was unzipped. It looked empty. My stomach dropped. The men had said they were staying the night, so where were they? I rushed back to wake my girlfriend. As I whispered my concern, we both heard it. Low voices behind our tent. My heart pounded. I grabbed my pocket knife and stepped outside. There, just feet away, stood the 2 men. They stared at me, completely motionless, their expressions blank and unreadable. A wave of terror washed over me. These men weren't just fellow campers. They were up to something. Something bad. My girlfriend peeked outside, and that snapped me into action. I shouted for her to run, pointing toward the trail. She bolted, and I followed, leaving everything behind. We sprinted for 10 solid minutes before slowing to a quick walk. When we finally reached the parking lot, the other car was still there, and the passenger door was open again. We drove straight to the nearest gas station and called the police. Days later, we learned that the car belonged to an older man who had recently been reported missing. The tent and gear at the campsite were his. But the 2 men? Nowhere to be found. Neither was the old man. To this day, I don't know what those men intended to do, but I do know that whatever it was, we barely escaped it. My job had me traveling constantly in my late 20s and early 30s. Most trips were brief, leaving little time for leisure. But after finishing work early on an assignment in Pennsylvania, I had an extra day to kill before my flight. Wanting to make the most of it, I found a scenic 6-hour hiking trail online, 3 hours in, 3 hours out. The dense forest and crisp air sounded like the perfect break from my usual routine. After grabbing some hiking gear from a nearby store, I set off around noon. The trail was completely empty, which I welcomed. About an hour in, I spotted a man sitting off to the side, His head hung low, a hood covering his face. As I passed, he suddenly lifted his head, locking eyes with me. A chill ran down my spine. Something about his stare was unsettling. I quickened my pace, occasionally checking behind me to make sure he wasn't following. 2 hours later, I stopped to rest on a fallen log. I had barely taken a few bites of my snack when I saw movement. The same man was now heading toward me. Alarmed, I stuffed my food back into my bag and continued down the trail. I hadn't seen him for hours. How had he caught up so fast? Then I heard it, running footsteps. I turned, and there he was, jogging toward me. I moved aside, hoping he'd just pass, but he stopped directly in front of me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet. "I think you dropped this," he said. I glanced at it. It wasn't mine. The wallet was worn, empty, completely unfamiliar. I told him as much, but his expression hardened. "No," he insisted. "This is yours. Take it." His tone made my skin crawl. He wasn't offering, he was demanding. I hesitated. His eyes were locked onto me, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Feeling cornered, I reluctantly took the wallet. His lips curled into a strange smile. "You're welcome." Then, he turned and walked away. I stood there, confused, unsettled. I flipped open the wallet. Nothing inside. Why was he so insistent that I take it? Shaking off the unease, I turned back toward my car. 2 hours later, as I neared the parking lot, the setting sun cast long shadows over the pavement. That's when I saw it. Behind my car, a crouched figure. My breath caught. It was him. I quietly reached for my keys, avoiding any sudden movements. Instead of heading for the driver's side, I walked to the passenger door, unlocking it as smoothly as possible. The moment I got in, he sprang up, lunging for the driver's door. I locked it just in time. His face twisted in fury as he pounded on the window. "Give it back!" he screamed. I ignored him, threw the car into reverse, and sped onto the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw him dart back into the woods. I drove straight to the police station and handed over the wallet. They took my report but had no explanation for what he was trying to do. I never found out his true intentions. And honestly, I don't want to. Late October is my favorite time to hike. The air is crisp, the leaves are vibrant, and the weather is just cool enough to be comfortable. That year, I had a rare weekend off, so I planned a solo overnight hike on a loop trail I had done a couple of years prior. This particular trail wasn't very popular, which I liked. It was about a day and a half long, looping back to the starting point. Early Saturday morning, I packed my gear and drove to the small gravel parking lot at the trailhead. The first few miles were mostly open fields, but eventually, the trail led into dense forest at the base of a small mountain. Around midday, I saw someone approaching in the distance. As he got closer, something about him felt off. He wasn't carrying a backpack, not even a water bottle. That alone was strange, considering how deep into the hike we were. When we passed each other, he gave me a quick wave. I nodded back, but I stayed cautious. Then I heard it. His footsteps stopped. I turned around, and he was facing me. "Where's your group?" he asked. A cold wave of unease hit me. It wasn't what he asked, it was how he asked it. As if he expected me to have people with me. As if he was checking. I forced a smile. "Oh, they're right behind me. Should be here any minute." His lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Good." Then, he turned and walked away. I continued forward, but my mind was racing. Why was he so deep into the trail without supplies? And why did he care if I was alone? By late afternoon, I decided to set up camp off-trail. I didn't want to be easily seen. I found a flat, quiet spot about half a mile away, pitched my tent, and tried to shake off the encounter. I ate dinner, watched the sun dip below the trees, and crawled into my tent for the night. Hours passed. I lay awake, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Close. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. I waited, straining to hear. Nothing. No retreating steps, no rustling, just silence. Whoever it was, they were standing there, watching. I stayed frozen in place for what felt like an eternity. The fear was suffocating. I kept telling myself it was an animal, but deep down, I knew better. Hours crawled by. The first hints of daylight finally crept through the tent fabric. I unzipped the tent just a sliver and peeked outside. Nothing. Slowly, I stepped out, scanning the area. The forest was eerily still. Then I saw them. Footprints. Deep in the dirt, right behind my tent, leading up to a nearby tree. Someone had been standing there, watching me. For hours. Panic surged through me. I barely took time to pack. I just grabbed my things and bolted for the main trail. My heart pounded as I power walked back the way I came. The entire return trip, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him. But the forest remained eerily empty. By the time I reached my car, the sun was setting. I told my friends what happened, and they all agreed I was lucky. I reported the incident to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. No one else had reported anything unusual. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. But I do know this: I will never go on a solo hike again.